Hey everyone, I hope you're well. And today I want to talk to you about emotional overwhelm because it's something that we discussed in the community this week. And by the end of this video, you'll understand what's actually happening in the body when overwhelm appears, what to start noticing when it does. And I want to walk you through 5 things that make a real difference when it comes to how you respond to it. Now, when I read through the responses to my post this week, something really important stood out. Almost nobody described a situation or a story. Instead, you described what was happening inside your body. So we have racing heart, shutting down, feeling frozen, and brain fog, that type of thing. And that's important because overwhelm doesn't begin in our thinking, it begins within the nervous system. If you understand that, it helps you understand why it happens, and more importantly, it gives you options rather than leaving you feeling powerless to the sensations that you experience. And I want you to know something else as well while I'm giving you this talk. Much of what many of you described in the group are things that I've experienced too, by the way, by virtue of the fact that I also have a nervous system. I'm not exempt from any of this. Nobody is. Everybody experiences overwhelm at times. And the difference isn't that some people never feel overwhelmed. The difference is learning to recognize what's happening early enough in your body that you can start to respond to it differently before you're flooded to the point of shutdown or paralysis that many of you have mentioned in the posts, in your response to the posts this week. So let's get clear about what overwhelm actually is. Now, overwhelm isn't just who you are. It isn't about emotional weakness. It's not about being too sensitive or some sort of personal failure. It's about emotional capacity. And capacity isn't something that we're automatically born with. It's something that develops over time. It's a skill set that's learned. One of the biggest myths about overwhelm is that it's simply the result of having too much to do or too many pressures building up in your life. But very often what we're actually looking at is a nervous system that spent years carrying more emotional responsibility than it should ever have had to. Now, burnout and overwhelm often get confused, but they're not the same thing. Burnout usually comes from long periods of pressure building up on the outside, and overwhelm is very different. Overwhelm often happens when your nervous system is carrying more emotional load on the inside than it knows how to handle. And it's like trying to pour 2 liters of water into a 1 liter bottle. The container simply isn't large enough to hold what's coming in. And that's why I asked you what your earliest physical signal was, because learning to recognize those signals in your body is often the very first moment you have to influence what happens next. Now, this conversation is also particularly relevant for many of us in this community because of the environments that we grew up in. Some of us grew up in emotionally restricted environments, downright emotionally fragile environments where emotions weren't talked about or even acknowledged. Some of you have experienced trauma, neglect, or instability. And when you grow up sensing that parts of you, parts of who you are, might not be accepted, your nervous system learns to stay on alert. You become highly attuned to other people's reactions, their moods, and whether they approve of you or not. Add to that the experiences that many women in this community have had around shame, rejection, secrecy, coming out later, family tension, or feeling like you had to carry all of that stuff on your own in silence for years. And the emotional load of carrying all of that becomes really heavy. And many of you have been carrying that silently for years while still trying to appear capable and functional on the outside. Now, if that load remains unaddressed, the threat system in the brain, particularly the amygdala, becomes way more reactive, which means you're not just responding to what's happening around you in the present day, you're responding from a nervous system that's already learned to stay vigilant. And if that pattern simply continues with no intervention, it doesn't resolve itself through avoidance or simply by trying to eliminate stress. The emotional charge is still sitting there on the inside, and people just become very good at building a life around managing it. And many of you don't realize that that's what you've done. And there's something that many don't realize also. They believe that if they could just eliminate anxiety or just get rid of discomfort or just get rid of feelings, difficult feelings, then everything in their life would just finally fall into place. But emotional health doesn't come from eliminating emotions. It comes from increasing your capacity to experience them. Now, this is where a concept called the window of tolerance becomes really important. Now, the window of tolerance is our ability to experience emotional complexity and still function. In other words, to feel what we feel without becoming completely flooded by it or shutting down altogether. Now, nearly every client who comes to work with me has never been taught emotional regulation. Instead, what they've learned is ways to cope. So suppressing what they feel, distracting themselves, overthinking or seeking approval, feeling shame for what they feel, so hiding it, or abandoning themselves in order to keep relationships stable and steady outside of them. And that makes sense if emotional regulation was never modeled growing up. You know, those strategies might help in the short term, but they don't increase emotional intolerance. They don't increase emotional tolerance. Now, when emotional tolerance is low, it can feel like there's no shock absorbers on the inside of you. Every emotional bump that happens lands really heavily on the inside, and the system quickly moves into overwhelm. That's why the work isn't about eliminating emotion. It's about gradually increasing your capacity to stay present with it. Because the more your nervous system learns that it can experience emotion without being overwhelmed by it, the wider the window of tolerance becomes for you. So let me leave you with 5 things that really matter when emotional flooding appears. Now, the first is this. There's no such things as good or bad emotions. Emotions are simply signals about how your nervous system is interpreting what's happening around you. What makes them feel good or bad is often the story that you attach to them. If you've learned that certain emotions are unacceptable, that you shouldn't be experiencing something, then you're going to fight them instead of understanding them. The second is that overwhelm is a capacity signal, not a character flaw. There's nothing wrong with you if you are overwhelmed. But when the emotional load coming into your system exceeds your nervous system's ability to regulate it, what happens is flooding. Now, that doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It means the container inside of you is not yet large enough to hold what's happening. Now, third is that the body signals overwhelm before the mind explains it. So you'll experience tight chest, restlessness, racing thoughts, irritability. They're not random sensations, they're early warning signals. Now, the earlier you recognize them, the more influence you have over what happens next. Now, fourth is that identity matters more than people realize. If you've spent years seeing yourself as the anxious one, the emotional one, or the one who really struggles all the time, that sense of identity can really quietly reinforce the pattern. People behave in ways, don't they, that are consistent with who they believe they are. When identity shifts, behavior begins to follow. And that's worth noticing. That's really true for a lot of work within therapy. Your sense of who you are really determines how you behave and how you show up to things. And the fifth is this. Overwhelm is not permanent. It's a patterned response. Your nervous system learned its current response through repetition, healthy or unhealthy, but through a consistent pattern of repetition. And patterns, it's important for you to know that patterns can be retrained through consistent new responses. Our brains are very plastic and they will respond when you're giving it a new route, you're giving it a new way. Because when we're emotionally flooded, the other thing is that the thinking parts of the brain become far less accessible. We're not able to think rationally when we are flooded. So what happens is many of you will move into a freeze response. And when that happens, your sense of choice narrows and it can feel really paralyzing. Now, the work is not to force yourself to think your way out of that state. The work is to stabilize the nervous system so that the thinking brain, the logical part of your brain, the part that's responsible for making informed decisions and choices, can come back online, and your options then start to widen again. That's where the new pattern gets built, and you can start to do that by how you use your body, how you use your breath. There's a video in here, I must post it, but just lengthening your breath, lengthening your out breath, and staying with the breath for longer than you want to will make such a difference between you running to try and fix something outside of you versus staying with yourself, letting the sensation be there, knowing that you can still function, knowing that you can just focus on one small thing, just for the time that you're experiencing that flooding. Just staying with the breath is the most important thing that you can focus on, because your thinking parts are going offline. You haven't got time to think about logical reasoning. Those parts aren't available to you. So staying with your breath, staying with your body is the most important thing. And like I say, the work is to stabilize the nervous system so those thinking parts can come back online. And there's something I see again and again with women I work with. When someone begins responding to those early body signals consistently by following a clear framework that acts as a handrail for them to hold on to, they have a repertoire, they know what they're going to do, and they repeat that consistently over a period of time. Many women notice that within a few weeks, they can move through emotions that previously would have completely floored them. And it isn't because the emotion disappeared. It's nothing to do with that. It's because they've started responding differently. They've started to teach their nervous system a different response. And they see very clearly that capacity, building that capacity with how they relate to their body's ability to experience a normal human emotion is a skill set. And it's a skill set that you can learn as well, that it sets them free. And they can see that they've never been weak or incompetent like they've previously used to tell themselves, or there's something wrong with them because they're feeling certain things. That's really important. But also, here's the uncomfortable truth. And I wonder if some of you can recognize yourselves in this as well. Many people spend years trying to eliminate anxiety instead of developing the skill set required to work with it. But the people who build stable, meaningful lives are not the people who never experience anxiety. They are the people who have learned how to stay with themselves when emotion appears. And that is a skill, one that can be learned, one that can be strengthened, one that I teach my clients, and one that changes everything about how you move through the world. So I think the real question is, before I finish, is what are you practicing? Are you trying to build a life where difficult emotions never appear? Or are you developing the capacity to stay with yourself when they do? Because one of those approaches keeps people stuck for years, and the other allows them to move through the world with a lot more freedom, with a lot more capacity, rather than being scared of what they might feel. Now, if this resonated with you, then let me know what part of the conversation hit home. And if there's anything that you want clarity on, just let me know. I'm happy to answer. So take care, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care. Bye for now.